To mourn the passing of the late Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja, President Bola Tinubu directed that Nigeria's national flags be flown at half-mast for 7 days across the country. Tonight, we reflect on his leadership and the future for the Nigerian Army. Babajide Ogunsoro, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more insight on this. Babajide, it's great to have you again on the News at 10.
Good evening, today.
Now, indeed, this is a tragedy for Nigeria, or maybe described as a great tragedy, not just for the family of the late Chief of Army Staff, but is there any easy way to say it, to put it from when we got this news?
I would like to put it the way my grandfather used to tell me, and he would sit me down and say, Jide, don't judge your day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. And for Lieutenant Taoreed Lagbaja, why we've seen this situation today is because he's planted a lot of seeds. If you speak to his family, his friends, soldiers, officers, the summation is he did plant a lot of seeds in the lives of people. So tonight I'd like us to take a look at some of the popular words and some of what we've seen. And I especially like how the Chief of Defense Staff has put it. That's his Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja's remembrance will be as lasting as the land he honored. Perhaps in simple terms, his memories and his remembrance will be here forever.
So let's look at the highlights of Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja's military career. As a military officer, what were the highlights of his career, really?
There are several ways to look at this. One interesting way that I've been studying is, when he joined the National Nigerian Defense Academy, that was 36 years ago. And the question we should now look at is the foundation was set for him. The then Chief of Army Staff in 1987 was Sani Abacha. And so, yes, there was an environment that had been laid. The military was attractive. So the question now we should ask is, yes, we have a new acting...
And of course, we were in the military regime at the time.
No, we were not even in the military regime at that time. So yes, we were. Yes, we were. 1987, yes, it was. But however, Abacha was not the president. It was General
Ibrahim
Babangida. Exactly. So we had General Abacha as the Chief of Army Staff, but the environment, the Army still had that environment that attracted a lot of young soldiers. So the question we have to ask ourselves now is, yes, we have a new acting Chief of Army Staff. We still have a similar system. Yes, the military system and the army system is not perfect, but is one of the few systems we have in Nigeria that works. So the question is, today, we are creating an environment that in another 36 years, some of the soldiers that are coming in today will become Chief of Army Staff, just like the way Taoreed Lagbaja became the Chief of Army Staff, though he came in 36 years. So it's really a journey. But beyond this journey, we need to look at what are these things that make his name and his brand be on the lips of a lot of Nigerians. And if we take a look at, which I've spoken to a lot of senior officers, junior officers, what are the things that were behind Lagbaja's heroics? 7 things come out first. Number 1 is love for his family and his love for Nigeria. That comes out first. Second is Lieutenant Taoreed Lagbaja had a lot of integrity that he earned from the trust of his men. Integrity, a big factor why we keep hearing the name Lagbaja. Number 3 out of 7, hard and smart work. He was diligent across all his field operations. Major diligence shown in his operations and his positions in the north and south. Number 4, he was highly strategic in his thinking. In most times, they said he was biased towards action. He always wanted action. So Lieutenant Taoreed Lagbaja had a strong bias towards action, and that made him proactive. Number 5, he showed extreme courage that hadn't been seen in decades. That was one of the things that made him a hero. Number 6, he had built great relationships, not just with the soldiers, junior and senior officers, his bosses, and yes, especially with the president, the Grand Commander of the Federal Republic. And finally, what made him also successful as the Chief of Army Staff, he made sure that he aligned with the philosophy of the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa. Put all these 7 things together is what made Lieutenant Taoreed Lagbaja the hero that we talk about today.
Interesting, of course. But what next for the Nigerian army going forward? I mean, now that we have a new, an acting chief of army staff, I mean, what should Nigerians expect from this new setting going forward?
For me, there are 3 things. The first is there are still lots of conspiracies surrounding the death of the late chief of army staff, which I think the acting chief of army staff needs to clear, because with conspiracies comes low motivation and morale for his men. So the first is he needs to really clear the conspiracies, and there are really lots of conspiracies. The second is he needs to now create a path for himself. He needs to have his legacy. His legacy clearly has to be aligned with the vision of the armed forces of Nigeria, but the acting chief of army staff, Lieutenant General Olufemi Oluyede, needs to have his legacy and create a path. The third and final, and perhaps the most important thing is he needs to also understand that, yes, which he clearly knows, that the office of the Chief of Army Staff is powerful. Any office that has power, clearly we know, will have politics. And any office that has politics comes danger. So, power, politics, and danger. But beyond this, we need to look at where were we when the Chief of Army Staff, the late Chief of Army Staff came in last year, June. Where are we now? And clearly, what are the things that need to be done? Again, don't forget power, politics, and danger. And if we take a look at what comes next, which is where were we? If you take a look at that, where were we June last year? Where are we now? And what lies ahead? This is interesting. June last year, when the service chiefs were appointed, security sentiment across the citizens, among citizens, 41%. That is still the same as October this year in terms of when citizens were asked, is security improving? Last year was 41%. Now it's still 41%. Still the same. Why is that? What's the politics involved in that? Remember, during the election last year, the President Tinubu had 2.6 million voters that voted for him. That was the largest voting bloc for him across the country. So our eyes are on what will be the security situation going forward in the Northwest. Southwest, we've seen improvements in security compared to last year. North Central, improvements. We still have challenges in the Northeast, where it was 57% last year. Citizens living there say that is really not improving as much as they had hoped for. South, we've seen improvements. Southeast, we see improvements. So across 6 regions, one region still stays the same with regards to security from the perception of citizens. That's the Northwest. We've seen improvements across 4 regions, and we see the desperate need for much more improvements across the Northeast. So going forward, what we'll expect is we'll see more effort towards the Northwest and the Northeast, while making sure things do not deteriorate across those other 4 regions that are currently in the green. Don't forget there are the political implications to it, looking at the numbers that the president scored in 2023, and also knowing that in another 6 months, INEC will be releasing the calendar for the 2027 general elections.
Indeed, interesting times, and we'll definitely be keeping tabs on the situation as it continues to develop. But of course, our hearts and thoughts to the family of the late Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja. Babajide, thank you so much for your analysis.
The pleasure is all mine, and the expectations will be that the acting Chief of Army Staff, just like the previous ones are done, will plant new seeds that will lead to make sure that in the future, those that are coming in now will also have that sort of environment that they had when they came in 1987. Because for a lot of soldiers, their own 1987 is today.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much once again.
The pleasure is all mine.